That's good. Okay, so settle back, relax, here I go. We're here today to honor four men, four veterans of the Civil War. Asa Dennison, Jeremiah Davis, James Hale, and James Jameson. But first, let me give you a little context. Over 3 million Americans fought in the Civil War, 2 million of them on the northern side, 1 million on the Confederate side. New York alone sent almost 500,000 men to fight. Onondaga County sent 12,000 men off to war. Here in the sacred soil of Oakwood lie the remains of 842 of those veterans. Our Oakwood veterans served from 19 different states. They served in the Navy, the U.S. Regulars, the U.S. Colored Troops. We have 3 Civil War nurses and 4 recipients of the Medal of Honor. And you may be surprised to find out that we also have 4 Confederates buried here in Oakwood. We have 25 black soldiers, 4 of whom do not have a headstone. The historic Oakwood Cemetery Preservation Association is in the process of rectifying this situation. Now, the Civil War began in April of 1861 when the Confederates fired on the Union garrison at Fort Sumter, located in Charleston Harbor, South Carolina. The Lincoln administration and the general public thought the conflict would last, maybe 3 months or so. Well, the clouds of war hung over America for 4 long, bloody years. At the first major battle of the war, the first Battle of Bull Run, Northerners were so confident that the Confederates would be crushed that spectators came out to watch the battle. They came from Washington and sat on a hillside. They came in their fancy carriages, bringing picnic lunches with them. Well, it turned out to be a debacle. The Union Army was repulsed and retreated, and the onlookers had to run for their lives. In fact, a congressman from Rochester, Alfred Ely, was captured by Confederate soldiers and spent 6 months in Libby Prison. He wasn't exchanged until December of 1861. The Union forces in the Eastern Theater protecting the city of Washington, D.C., eventually became known as the Army of the Potomac. They needed to protect Washington since the capital of the Confederacy, Richmond, was a scant 95 miles away. Now, that army went through various commanders of dubious ability, including Irwin McDowell, George McClellan, Ambrose Burnside, and Fighting Joe Hooker. The Union defeats under these commanders were staggering and demoralizing, beginning with Fort Sumter, then First Battle of Bull Run. In May of June 1862, there was the defeat at the 7 Days Battle. The Second Bull Run, another defeat. Even Antietam, touted as a Union victory, was really George B. McClellan missing an opportunity to crush General Lee's Confederate forces. After so many setbacks, President Lincoln saw the Battle of Antietam as his opportunity to change the course of the war and directly attack that peculiar institution of slavery. On January 1st, 1863, he issued the Emancipation Proclamation, which stated that on the first day of January in the year of our Lord, 1863, all persons held as slaves within any state or designated part of a state, the people whereof shall then be in rebellion against the United States, these people shall be thenceforward forever free. The defeats suffered by the Union Army had resulted in massive casualties, not to mention the even greater losses due to disease. Would the federal government have to resort to conscription to fill the depleted ranks? The idea of a draft was anathema to the general public. We need only look to the 1863 draft riots in New York City and the destruction they wrought. But there were those who recognized an obvious source of replacements for those casualties: African Americans. As early as May of 1862, General David Hunter organized a black regiment in, of all places, South Carolina. He was way ahead of his time. He had moved too far, too fast for the administration, including Lincoln and Secretary of War Edwin Stanton. They insisted that that regiment be disbanded. There were almost 500,000 free blacks in the northern states, and the emancipation freed the southern slaves. And if the military and governmental bureaucracy could be overcome, it would allow an entire people to rise up and participate in a struggle for their own future. The 4 black veterans we honor today answered their nation's call. Let me tell you a little bit about each one of them. Asa Dennison was born in Madison County in the town of Sullivan in 1847. He died in 1920. He enlisted in the 14th Rhode Island Heavy Artillery, a black regiment, in December of 1863. That regiment in early 1864 became the 11th U.S. Colored Heavy Artillery. That was the official government designation, U.S. Colored Troops. After the war, Asa came back to New York State and lived in the town of Sullivan, eventually moved to Fayetteville and then to Manlius. By 1920, the year of his death, he was boarding in Syracuse with fellow veteran William Courtwright. Asa Dennison is buried in Section 47, Lot 175. Jeremiah Davis was born in May of 1842 in Frederick, Maryland. Jeremiah Davis was born a slave. He belonged to, hang on a second, Colonel Thomas Hammond, a wealthy slave owner in Frederick County, Maryland. Now, on April 11th, 1864, Colonel Hammond signed Davis's manumission papers, and the colonel swore his allegiance to the Union. I do believe he had his fingers crossed behind his back. 4 months later, on August 11th, 64, Jeremiah Davis enlisted in Company I of the 4th U.S. Colored Troops. He was detailed as a teamster to drive an ambulance at division headquarters. On April 3rd, 1865, Davis's regiment, the 4th U.S. Colored Troops, were the first regiment to occupy the former Confederate capital of Richmond, Virginia. In 1884, Davis and his wife Anna came to New York State. In November of 1924, Davis, then a widower, died a very tragic death. The 82-year-old veteran died in a house fire in Pittsford, New York. He is buried in Section 47, Lot 183. James Hale was born in 1844 in Claiborne County, Mississippi. James Hale was born a slave. Military papers list his proper name, and I hope I get this right, Chedrick M. DeBeniga. The 1860 census shows the Crane Plantation, where James was born, as having 120 slaves on 2,400 acres. When the opportunity arose, James Hale enlisted in the 1st Mississippi Infantry, which was organized in May of 1863. In February of 1864, the regiment's designation was changed to the 51st U.S. Colored Troops. Now, James Hale's papers are sporadic. He did apply for a federal pension under both names in 1890. He was denied under both names. His life after the war was problematic. We know he was in central New York by 1870. His mental stability was questionable. He had run-ins with the law. In fact, in the 1890 census, his residence is listed as the Onondaga County Penitentiary. In May of 1904, James Hale was legally judged insane. On the 12th of May, 1912, James Hale died at the Binghamton State Hospital. He is buried in Section 51 over the hill in Lot 196. Now that brings us to James Jameson. A headline in an article of the August 9th, 1916 Post-Standard read, "Oldest barber in Syracuse is claim of James Jameson." The line below read, "Celebrates 80th birthday today with veterans." Not until the last paragraph did the article mention that in 1863, James had enlisted with the 54th Massachusetts Infantry, the illustrious Civil War unit that earned fame leading the assault on Fort Wagner. Now, James's story begins in Syracuse, near the old train station at Vanderbilt Square, where he was born. Now, the square was located on East Washington Street between Salina and Warren Streets. His father, Jim, was a porter, and his mother, a cook. He had a sister, Henrietta, who was about 5 years older than he. His parents died when he was young, and he and his sister were adopted. Well, when Henrietta was 10 years old, she was given away. James never saw his sister again. At age 11, James ran away. 5 years later, he was back in Syracuse having learned the barbering trade, and he opened a shop. It wasn't until 1914 that James Jameson retired. So how did James Jameson, a barber in Syracuse, New York, wind up in a black regiment in the state of Massachusetts? Let me tell you the rest of the story. As we saw in South Carolina, various attempts had been made on a state level to create regiments of black troops. But for various reasons, they just could not be sustained. The first official black regiment to be created at the state level was one from Massachusetts. On February 7th, 1863, 1 month after the Emancipation, Governor John Andrew opened recruitment for the 54th Massachusetts Infantry. Well, by March 2nd, there were only 44 recruits in that camp at Reedville. Things were moving rather slowly, so Governor Curtin decided to open up recruitment to men from other states. On March 11th, 1863, there appeared in the Syracuse Daily Standard a letter written by Frederick Douglass from his home in Rochester. The headline was, "Men of Color to Arms." His opening paragraph read, "When the first rebel cannon shattered the walls of Sumter and drove away its starving garrison, I predicted that the war then and there inaugurated would not be fought entirely by white men. Every month's experience during these 2 dreary years has confirmed that opinion. A war undertaken and brazenly carried out for the perpetual enslavement of colored men calls logically and loudly upon colored men to help suppress it." He goes on to say, "There is no time to delay. The tide is at its flood that leads on to fortune. From east to west, from north to south, the sky is written all over with now or never. Liberty won by white men would lack half its luster. Who would free themselves now must strike the blow. Better even to die free than to live as slaves. In good earnest, then, after the best deliberation, I now, for the first time during this war, feel at liberty to call and counsel you to arms. I urge you to fly to arms and smite with death the power that would bury the government and your liberty in the same hopeless grave. I wish I could tell you that the state of New York calls you to this high honor. For the moment, her constituted authorities are silent on the subject. And just as an aside, The governor of New York State at that time was Horatio Seymour, who was born right here in Onondaga County in the town of Pompey. Douglas goes on, "We are not compelled to wait for her, New York State. We can get at the throat of treason and slavery through the state of Massachusetts. Massachusetts now welcomes you to arms as her soldiers. She has but a small colored population from which to recruit. She has full leave of the general government to send one regiment to the war, and she has undertaken to do it. Go quickly and help fill up this first colored regiment from the north. I'm authorized to assure you that you will receive the same wages, same rations, same equipment, same protection, same treatment, and the same bounty secured by white soldiers. The case is before you. This is our golden opportunity. Let us accept it and forever wipe out the dark reproaches unsparingly hurled against us by our enemies. Win for ourselves the gratitude of our country and the best blessings of our posterity through all time. The nucleus of this first regiment is now in camp in Reedville, a short distance from Boston. I will undertake to forward to Boston all persons adjudged fit to be mustered into this regiment, who shall apply to me anytime within the next 2 weeks." Well, James Jameson probably read the entire letter that was published in the Standard. Jameson made his way to Albany, probably by the Erie Canal, and then worked his way over to Reedville, Massachusetts. He got there and enlisted on the 29th of April of 1863. In fact, so many recruits were showing up in Reedville that a second black regiment was authorized to be formed. They would become the 55th Massachusetts Infantry. James was 24 years old. His papers say he was 5 foot 4 inches tall, light complexion, brown eyes, and black hair. He mustered into the regiment on May 3rd and was assigned to Company H. On the 28th of May, the 54th Massachusetts, under the command of Colonel Robert Gould Shaw, 1,000 men strong, equipped with Army blue uniforms and Enfield rifles, set sail for South Carolina, there to meet their destiny. On July 18th, the 54th was assigned to lead the assault on Fort Wagner, a small Confederate post on Morris Island, South Carolina. Manned by only 1,600 troops, the Confederates were still able to repulse the attack. After suffering considerable losses in their failed attempt to take the fort, the 54th fell back and was held in place. They had lost 72 killed, 165 wounded, 30 missing. Among the missing and presumed dead was Colonel Robert Gould Shaw. On September 7th, when the Confederates finally abandoned the fortifications, the 54th Regiment was the first to occupy the works. And they stayed there until the end of January of '64, when they were sent to Florida. They had significant engagements at Alucity, Florida, Honey Hill, South Carolina, and Boykins Mill, South Carolina. Their legacy, however, was forged at Fort Wagner. What they did there was heroic, indeed almost suicidal. James Jameson, Company H, was there, and he survived to come back to his hometown and step back into the business he would conduct for 60 years, barbering. In 1907, he asked the members of the route post, number 51 of the Grand Army of the Republic, to be in charge of his funeral when the time came. And in 1920, he actually picked out the casket he would be buried in. On July 16th, 1924, James Jameson passed away. He is buried in Section 47, Lot 183. James and his 3 comrades, Asa Dennison, Jeremiah Davis, and James Hale, have gone nearly a century without headstones. Having served their country in her time of need, 2 of them escaping the shackles of slavery, these veterans rightly deserve the honor we bestow upon them today. To these 4, to all who wear the uniform of their country, past and present, I say thank you for your service, and God bless the United States of America. Thank you.